So that is a really good question. How do you run investor days? Particularly if you've never run one before. You kind of feel a bit silly running the first one, I'm going to tell you the truth. But investor days are a really fantastic way of managing your time, because as you run a property business, oh my goodness, time, money, skills, everyone thinks it's money that you really need. Oh my goodness, it's time. You need to duplicate yourself about 4 times over. So instead of doing one-on-one conversations non-stop with potential investors, you're going to get up to 15, 20. We ended up about 30 investors coming to our investor days. But I'm going to tell you now, the best number for investors to come to your investor day is 15. So put your ego away, not that I'm suggesting you got one, but put your ego away and have only 15 people coming to an investor day. And the reason you want that is, number one, it helps with your time. You're saying the same thing to 15 people, so you've just multiplied yourself 15 times over. How good is that? Number two, they're seeing that they've got competition. Never a bad thing, because actually an investor on their own might be kind of like, I'm going to be a little bit prima donna-ish, but an investor appreciating that there are, 14 other people in the room that also want the deals that you're working on, it just allows them to understand they're not the only, disco dancer. Should we just say that? Number three, people can kind of hide who they are one-on-one, because they're on their best, aren't they? Best behaviour. Woo! In a group, it's much more difficult for a human being to not show who they are. So what I mean by that is somebody that's actually really deeply selfish with the time and won't let anyone else speak, you kind of know that they're going to be selfish with you one-on-one later on, but even if they've been on their best behaviour, because they've seen it, they've not been respectful to the other people in the group. Somebody that's quite respectful to the other people in the group is probably going to be respectful to you at all times as well, because it's their ingrained behaviour. So that's quite useful. But I would say, I did once have an investor day where, I can't remember if it was a lady or a man, but anyway, the person kept shoving people out the way. So I was like, whoa, I'm not going to work with that person. But it turned out they were a little bit deaf. So they needed to get physically close to me to be able to hear what I was saying. And I was kind of making a judgment that possibly they were being a bit selfish, and actually I hadn't appreciated they just needed to hear. So sometimes double check your preconceptions before you rule someone out. So, and then the next thing is they're going to ask questions. And when you are presenting to an investor, they're going to ask a few questions, and probably after the conversation, they're going to be like, oh man, I wish I'd asked that question and that question and that question. If you've got 15 or 20 investors or 5 investors in a group, suddenly the likelihood of everything they need to know being asked is multiplied enormously. So they are going to get a much more satisfactory experience, a much greater understanding of the process of working with you, because they and their crew, even if they're kind of slightly competing against each other later on for your working property, they and their crew are going to ask all the questions that are needed. By putting the investors together, there's some real benefits. Next is, how do you run it? Well, it's a cup of tea. You put tea, coffee, plate of biscuits. In the early days, we didn't charge people. Later on, we did. We charged people money to join our investor days. But in the early days, we didn't. Later on, why did we charge them money? Because we wanted to see that they were committed. We used to charge £20, and it was on Eventbrite, and they bought their ticket. Because if somebody's not paid any money for a ticket, they're a lot less likely to turn up. If somebody's paid money for a ticket, they're much more committed. We started off by doing them on Saturdays, and we moved it to a Monday. Why? Because we wanted to see people actually taking time off work. We wanted to see their commitment, and we did it on a Monday, 2 till 6. So do you want to know what happened during the investor day as well? Okay, 2 o'clock they'd arrive, 2 till 2:30, tea, coffee, mingle, meet, greet. You always have at least 2 volunteers that are there to meet and greet, tick people's names off. I don't do the kind of meet and greet kind of stuff because I'm too busy focusing on the investors. And then what we would do is talk through, this is our background, this is what we're doing, these are how many deals we intend to do this year, this is how you could work with us, here are some previous deals, not current deals, previous deals, so you can see how we present them, this is how we release them to you, these are our terms and conditions, this is our paperwork, this is what you need to do. Here are the things that could go wrong. Very important. Here are, and usually in our investor days, we'd have 2 or 3 investors that had previously worked with us as well. So, talk to so and so, they've already worked with us. So you've got some validation in the room, you've got previous deals, which are validation, and then you've got honesty by saying these are all things that could go wrong. Don't join us unless you're prepared for things going wrong as well as things going right. And then, so we do that for about 45 minutes. And then we'd open up for question and answer. So we wouldn't answer questions during the presentation, we'd answer questions at the end. There'd be a good half hour of questions, and then we'd serve a second round of tea and coffee. During that second round of tea and coffee, my volunteers would go around my investors and say, have you got a follow-up call booked with Susannah? And if they didn't, they'd put them in my diary there and then with a little clipboard saying, here are the available slots. Put your name and your phone number in, so that by the time they'd gone, every single investor was ready to be followed up in my diary. Later, and we actually didn't hold them in fancy places, we held them in the properties that we were renovating. So sometimes there was heating, sometimes there was not. Sometimes the property was ready to be sold and they had to take their shoes off and wear those little plastic shoe protector things. Sometimes they had to wear hard hats and high-vis jackets and sign declaration to say that they understood that it was a risky site and they were on site, but we held it in places that they could see what was happening. And later on, we'd often, because we're doing so many deals, we'd have like 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 deals within a walking distance. We'd often take them to a second deal. So if we hosted them in a deal that was ready to be sold or on the market currently, we'd then either drive them or walk them to a second deal that's being renovated. They can meet some builders. Then we go back to the first deal for the tea and coffee. So, meet, greet. This is what we do. This is our background. This is what we plan to deliver this year. This is how you can work with us. This is what's required of you. This is what could go wrong. And have you booked a follow-up call with a shed load of tea, coffee and cake? And a site visit if you've got another site on. That's it. Sourcing discounted deals, it is the basis of all property wealth. I have written a pack for you guys. You can download it right now. 45 million quid's worth of property, agreed sourcing price for 30 million quid. All that information in that pack.